review of internal control and process mining. So because many of you were not here last class, right? So now for internal control, can someone describe at a high level what is internal control and what does internal control do? Like internal controls are just a set of processes or activities that the company implement to make sure that the following objectives are met, right? And this is a very redundant definition, but the internal controls will ensure the reliability and accuracy of the financial reports and the efficiency, effectiveness of the business operation, right? And also the compliance with laws and regulations. But at a nutshell, the internal controls are just activities that the firms use to prevent things from going wrong, right? So that's a very high-level understanding. And we also talk about the causal framework, right? So in the causal framework, we have 5 components, and one major component is the control activity. And we talk about there are 3 categories of control activity. So what are the 3 categories? She said preventive and detective. So these are the 3 types of control activities. So can someone describe what is a preventive activity, and can you give an example? So preventive is you prevent things from going wrong, right? So separate. Can you describe what is a separation of duty? So you want to have separate roles for each individual, so that it makes it very hard to conduct fraud, because you have to convince everyone involved in that activity to collude, right? So it's called separation of duty. So can someone describe what is a detective control and give us an example? So like a review, right? End of the month review. So yeah, that's a detective, because by reviewing the transactions, you're identifying maybe there are some discrepancies, right? The information doesn't match. So that indicates a potential error or fraud, and then you can investigate. So those are very good examples, right? And finally, the corrective control is just that after you identify the error, and then you correct it, right? So those are the 3 types of control activities. In terms of process mining, right? So can someone describe at a high level what is process mining? I know it's a little bit difficult to define it, so maybe you can just talk about what process mining can do. So it uses an event log to track what happens to a particular transaction, right? That's a very good description. So do you guys still remember what is an event log? What is an event log? The 3 major attributes in an event log, right? So the 3 attributes are first the transaction ID or a case ID. So you can think of it as like a sales order placed by the customer, right? Let's say order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then the activity will contain, let's say, descriptions of what happened to this particular order. Right? For example, an activity can be this order was created, and then the timestamp is just the time when this activity happened. So from this event log, we can tell, well, this particular order was created at this time, and this particular order was shipped at this time, and this particular order is paid at this time. So that's an event log, right? It contains this ID that we use to track a particular transaction, and also a description of the activity of what happened to the transaction, and also a timestamp that says this is the time when this activity happened. So the process mining is basically a process where you use that event log to track the life cycle of a transaction, right? And using some visualization technique, you can also visually observe the sequence of the activities happened to particular transactions to see if the transaction follows the prescribed sequence of the activities of the firm, right? So for example, let's say if a firm says any sales order above $5,000 needs manager approval. if that's the prescribed procedure, then from process mining, if you observe any transaction that fall into that category, skipped the approval process, then that means this violation of internal control, or this internal control is not effective because no one is following that, right? So you can directly visualize whether or not the firm is following that internal control activity, right? So that's why the process mining can be used as a tool to perform internal control testing. Okay. So those are the overview. So now let's start our lecture today. So in the earlier, Yijun distributed the handouts, right? So the handouts can also be found on this process mining use SQL to build event log module. So if you download this document, you get the same file, right? But I think that you may want to take a look at the hard copy version. So I print out the handouts. So this handout contains 14 pages. So the first page is just like a high-level description of this case. And from page two is just like a figure of the relationships among the tables that we're going to use later. And then page 3 all the way to page 7 is called a data dictionary. So I will come back to this later. But this is basically a description of what tables are included in the Access database and a description of each data attribute. So now I want you to go to page number 9, which is the appendix that describes this order to cash process. So I know that before the Thanksgiving break, I said I want you to read this case right before coming to class today, but I assume that you didn't, right? Because you are having a break. So here I'll give you about 5 minutes to go through this appendix number 1. So while you are reading this description, I want you to think about what are the internal control activities that are included in this description, and what kind of control is that? Is it preventive or detective? Okay, so I'll give you 5 minutes, and later we can go through this together. So I think most of you must have just skimmed the case, right? So we can go through this one more time together. So I think the first 2 paragraphs are just about the background, right? So we can start from the 3rd paragraph. And so from here on, while we are doing this together, for each major activity, I will add a subtitle. For example, let's say for the 3rd paragraph, right? I think it's mainly about generating a customer order. So what I will do is that I will just, put a subtitle here, like create a customer order, something like that, so that we know what are the major steps of the company, right? In terms of in the sales process or order to cash process. So I'll first give it a title. Let's say create customer or purchase order, sorry. The purchase order. So the process begins when the company receives an order from a customer via phone or online. If it's a phone order, then the sales clerk will enter the customer information into a computer system, and then the system will automatically create a purchase order. For an online order, the customer's information is digitally captured in the system, and then the system automatically generates the order. And because this is a business-to-business company, right? They sell products to businesses. So in this case, usually the sales is made on credit. That means that the customers get the product first and then they pay. So now just looking at this paragraph of this order generation process, can you identify any internal control activities? And if so, what does that control do? Specifically, what kind of risk does that control prevent? If there's no internal control, what are the risks related to this activity, and what control activity can you implement to prevent that risk? So maybe let's first think about what are the internal control activities can you identify here? So you can think of it as preventive, detective, corrective. What are the activities that can be categorized as falling into those categories? System automatically creates a purchase order and logs that. Let me highlight this. There are two parts, right? There is also this one. For online order, the system automatically creates. So if this is a control activity, what kind of risk does it mitigate or reduce? What kind of risk does this reduce? Yeah, it's preventive, and it prevents what from happening. So why an automated system can be used as a control? What does it do? Yeah, it can remove human error. That's exactly right? So do you guys agree? So here, so if we look at the online system order, right? For those online order, the system will automatically create a purchase order instead of going through a manual process by the sales clerk, right? So like in general, you can think of these automatic systems as having more accurate information as manually generated information. Because, for example, let's say when a sales clerk enters the customer information, they may mistype, for example, phone number, right, or zip code into the system. However, if the customer directly placed the order, right, and assuming that the computer system is working as expected, then after the information flows into the computer system, then we can pretty much assume that the information is left intact, right? So we can reduce the human error introduced by the sales clerk. So Push classify this as preventive because you are preventing the errors introduced by the sales clerk from flowing into the system, right? Okay. So what are the risks? So before we move on, do you guys have any comments, or can you identify other controls? I think that's pretty much it, right? I think that automated control system is the control activity that I can identify here. But is this process perfect, or does this process is this process subject to potential other errors or fraud? Because the computer system is like mostly implemented for the online orders, right? Do you think are there any potential other errors? Do you mean this one? The company bills. So this is just a practice where you sell something on credit. You first deliver the products to your customer and then you bill them. So this is just a description of how they operate their business. So it's not related to control. So here a potential risk is that, for those orders placed via phone, right? Because part of the order will be processed by the sales clerk, where they enter the customer information into the computer system. So I would say that this step is prone to potential human error, right? Like I said, the sales clerk may mistype the information, something like that. So if this is a risk, what kind of control can you implement to prevent this kind of risk? Like the risk of having human error introduced by the sales clerk. How to prevent that from happening? Basically, this is preventing the case where a sale was made to a customer who doesn't have sufficient credit or who cannot actually pay what they order. So now it's a time to test your financial accounting knowledge. So if a customer cannot pay what they ordered, that will cause what consequence on your revenue account or revenue related account. So first, like if I sell this product, I will say I will debit revenue, credit accounts receivable, right? And then when you pay me, I will debit my cash and credit my accounts receivable. If you cannot pay all your money to me to pay off this sale order, and then I have to do something to my accounts receivable. Yeah, that's the bad debt, right? So then I have to write off that accounts receivable. I will say, well, I thought Anthony is gonna pay all he owed, but now he tells me that he can only pay me 1/10 of what he ordered, right? So then I have to put 9/10 of the revenue as the bad debt, right? Because I know that he doesn't have enough, like his credit is not enough to like pay off everything, right? So then I need to adjust my bad debt allowance, right? So this is preventing that from happening. Okay, that's a very good capture, right, of this contra activity. So what else can you identify? I think that's a major one here, right? Approving and denying order. And actually, the whole activity by itself, which means the approving, denying this subtitle, right, itself is a control activity. But we identified a more detailed control activity here, which is that $3,000 approval. Okay, so let's move ahead. So after this order is approved, then the system will create a picking ticket. So a picking ticket is just a document that describes, let's say Jaden ordered 10 computers, right? And now the picking ticket will say, now inventory guys, you have to pack 10 computers for Jaden. So that's called a picking ticket. Blah, 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 blah. Once the picking ticket is created, the database will be updated. So let's say these two sentences are about create picking tickets. Okay. So here, I think I won't bother you with identifying control activities because there is no very obvious ones, but you can argue that the automatic generation of the picking ticket can be acted as a kind of control, right? Because you reduce any human errors, but there is no major ones here. Okay, now next, once there's a picking ticket, the inventory clerks in the warehouse will use this ticket as a guide to go pick up those inventory and pack. And then the inventory clerk will open the bill of lading, which is a document that is used when you are about to ship the products to the customer. Okay, so they open this document and also print a copy of the packing slip. So the packing slip is just a document that shows you packed up the inventory, right? And now it's ready to ship. So together we call these documents, the bill of lading and packing slip, the shipping document. Okay, so these are just in general shipping documents. So let me see, how can we classify those? So let's say here we have two activities, right? So if we want to be more specific. So let's say the sentence that the inventory clerk go and pick up the inventory, we can just use, let's say, pick up inventory. Okay, so I'm just summarizing this activity here. And now next, and again, there is no very obvious control here, right? So I will skip that. the inventory clerk will digitally sign. Okay, so this is the part where they get the shipping documents, right, including the bill of lading and the packing slip. And they will digitally sign to make sure to illustrate that they perform the task of packing, right, and also preparing those shipping documents. So then I'll just summarize this as prepare shipping documents, something like that. Preparing shipping doc and maybe ship the inventory. Ship the product. Right. And so that's the step. And so again, I don't think there are major controls. Now next, once the inventory clerk has finished entering the information to the database, for example, the information can be they packed up the inventory and they shipped it, right? So once you ship the product, that's the time for revenue recognition, right? That's what we discussed like all the time in this class. So with the shipping information, the system will then automatically generate the digital sales invoice, right? So this is an invoice that you send to the customer to bill them. And here, the accounting clerk reviews the digital invoice for completeness and accuracy by comparing the sales invoice to the purchase order and picking ticket. If the information matches, then the accounting clerk will digitally sign that the review is complete, and the system will send the customer the sales invoice. But if the information does not match, then the manager has to investigate. So let me name this whole paragraph as review the invoice and email the invoice to the customer. Okay, so now, can you identify any control activities here? This is very obvious control here. Okay, so this is an automatic control, right, to prevent errors from happening. This is a good one. Are there more? Are there more control activities in this process, in this highlighted paragraph? You would classify this as what type of control? Preventative. Okay, so do you guys agree here? Okay, so here, what this task is doing is that before they even recognize this as revenue, right, they want to make sure this sales invoice has the correct information. For example, I'm just making this up. Let's say Jaden ordered 10 computers, right? And then we shipped 10 computers to him. However, for some reason, the sales invoice says, oh, Jaden ordered 11 computers. So let's bill him for that 11 computers. So in this case, we're overbilling the customer, right? So that's a potential reason we have to do this check, right? To prevent that, we are recognizing that 11 computer as revenue instead of 10. Or there could be some, errors in the, let's say, email address, right? We should send to like a jaden@gmail.com, but then we mistyped his email, so it won't go through. So before we recognize that as revenue, we have to make sure the information matches between sales invoice, purchase order, and picking ticket. So we have to look at a purchase order because this proves the existence or occurrence of that sales, right? This to show that, oh, well, Jaden actually placed an order to us. We didn't send this, product to some fake customer, right? And then the picking ticket or other shipping document is to prove that the company actually shipped the products to the customer or delivered the services or products to the customer, right? So then this information has to match for revenue recognition to happen. And this is also called a three-way match, okay? So this is a very important control, and since I assume that this is conducted before they actually recognize the revenue, so I would think this as a preventive. But let's say if the revenue is automatically recognized once they ship the product, let's say at this step, then this three-way match will be a detective control at this stage because you are reviewing if there's any mismatches, right? So depending on the timing when this three-way match is performed, it can be either preventive or detective. Okay, if the information does not match, right, then they have to investigate and correct the problem. Yeah, so yeah, that's a very good find. This is a corrective control, right? This is after you identify any problem and then you correct it. Yeah. Okay. So now we are done with reviewing the invoice. Now it's the time for the customer to pay for the order, right? So now this paragraph contains very interesting controls. Okay, so the customer can make electronic payment or pay with a check. If the customer pays with a check, then two accounting clerks open the mail and immediately endorse the check as for deposit only. Then enter the check details and information from the remittance advice into a digital cash receipts pre-list. So I think this is just to document the information of that check. And then two clerks open the mail together to prevent one clerk from misappropriating the assets. If the customer pays electronically, then things are very easy because it's all just automatically processed by the system. The accounting clerk can also scan any remittance information, which is stored in the database, and the physical document will be shredded. And the scanning and shredding will be documented in the database too. So let me name this whole paragraph as accepting and processing, maybe just accepting payment, cash receipts. Okay, so now in this paragraph, can you identify any controls and what kind of control? Yeah, so this is a very classic control, right? Two accounting clerks open the mail together and endorse the check as for deposit only. And so this is a preventive or detective. Preventive, okay? So this is to prevent what kind of risk? Two accounting clerks open the check together and endorse that as for deposit only. What kind of risk does this control prevent? So we're not depositing the money yet. So currently we are just like opening the envelope and endorse the check. So we haven't deposited. Right. So yeah, actually they said here. So the idea of having two individuals to perform this task together is to prevent one clerk from stealing, right, or misappropriating the assets. Because if we do this together, you say, well, can I, deposit this to my bank account? They'll say, no, Irina, because I'm watching you, that kind of thing, right? So this is a preventive, and it prevents the risk that someone is misappropriating the assets. Okay. So now moving forward, after the cash is received, then it's time to deposit the cash. Okay. So to do that, all these checks will be sent to the sales manager. The manager will print a deposit slip. So this is like a document specifying these are the checks that I'm going to deposit, and this is the total amount. So that kind of like summary, and takes this deposit slip and they put it in the bank. And then and at the daily basis, the bank will send the firm an email acknowledging the amount they have received. And a sales clerk will verify that the bank deposit amount matches the amount on the cash pre-list or the deposit slip, something like that. The cash pre-list, which is compiled here, right, by the two employees who open the cash. So let me highlight this cash pre-list here. Use a different color. So they are matching that amount to the cash pre-list. And if the number matches, then that's fine. If not, then they have to follow up. So I would name this process as deposit checks. So depositing checks activity or procedure, can you identify any control activities? So on the same day the cash is received, I understand this is a control because you are creating more obstacles for the manager to misappropriate the asset, right? So on the same day, it's like almost real time, as you can imagine. Why printing a deposit slip is a control too. So this is similar to how, like in the previous class, we said we want two independent individuals to count the inventory. Right? For example, when let's say we ordered 1,000 computers from at Rogers, and then one day the computers arrive, right? Then I will ask a different individual to go and check how many computers have we received. So I know that I ordered 1,000, but I want to have you check if there are 1,000 computers. So we have two independent uncontaminated numbers. So that's the purpose of that, right? So this is also a preventive control. What are the other controls can you identify? Maybe you can take a look at the last paragraph here. What kind of control can you identify? Exactly. So this is a reviewing task, right? So here it's a detective control because you are detecting if the information, if any information from the bank mismatches with your own record. So the purpose of doing this is to say, well, for example, if let's say the manager steal $100, okay, then on the let's say in total they should deposit $1,000 to the bank, right? But because the manager stole $100, then the deposit amount that the bank got will be just $900. So by matching this number to the cash pre-list compiled by those, like from here, right? The employees who open the deposit and compile the cash pre-list, but comparing this original number to the bank's record, then you can identify if the manager misappropriate that $100, right? So that's why here you are not matching to the manager's deposit slip. You are managing to the most original cash pre-list because it's possible that, as Anthony said, the manager can revise something on the deposit slip, right? They revise the number from 1,000 to 900 and then deposit. And then if you match that number, then the bank says, yeah, 900. And the deposit slip says, yeah, 900. So you cannot identify any discrepancy. So that's why here we are matching the bank deposit to the cash pre-list. So that concludes the whole process, right? So as you can see now, instead of just looking at these activities at a high level, we also think about what are the risks related to each activity and what kind of internal control we can implement to prevent the risks. Oh yeah, so if it doesn't, yeah, that's a corrective, right? The corrective control. Tying back to why are we using process mining, right? So if you are using process mining, you can follow an order to see if the order goes through all these required activities. For example, does it go through approving step? And if so, right, and then does it go through, for example, like some detailed, let's say, are there two clerks opening the mail, right, when the cash is received for that order? Something like that. So that's the power of the process mining, because you can visualize what happened to that transaction, whether it goes through each individual control activity. So now our next step for today is to look at the table on your page number 7. So there's a table here. So this is a table that actually lists the major activities that we just talked about, although they are more granular in some case. So on this table, it identifies 14 major activities that we are interested in. So here you can see a lot of overlap, right? For example, I have this create purchase order, and then they do credit approval and deny separately. And we also have this creation of picking ticket, right? So and so forth. So you can see that these are the activities that we can identify. And some of the activities are considered as control activity, right? For example, this credit approval, this one is control. And review and approve sales invoice, this is a control. Review and reject, this is also control. I think print bank deposit slip. This is a control match. This is the control shred and scan. I think these are also controls, right? So these are activities, and we can also, identify some control activities. So now the next step is, can we create an event log that capture all these activities for each sales order, right? So now we are going to do the exercise of creating this event log. So to give you an idea of how what an event log will look like, I think I can put that next class. But we mentioned that on any event log, right, we have three major attributes. First, the case ID, right? You can think of it as an order ID, and then activity. So in our case, the activities are already listed on this table, like all these, right? And then we need a timestamp. So that's to get those information, we need to use their access database. Okay. So to get the database, you can go to the Canvas, right? Just download from our class module. It's in the process mining, use SQL to build event log. So download this order to cache database. Okay, so if you open this, it should look like this. So it has tables that we are very familiar with. So now I'll first, so when you get a chance later, I encourage you to read the table dictionary, data dictionary, because this one contains a description of each table and the field of each table. For example, let's say table bank, right? So the table bank is contained here. So now for each attribute, right? For example, bank NO. So here, if you don't understand the meaning of that attribute, you come to this data dictionary. It will say that this attribute is a unique identifier or number assigned to each bank. And now you know that, oh, this is actually the primary key, right? So this is basically a description of the table. So now let's look at our assignment for today. So what do we have to do? So our assignment is to fill out this table by identifying if we want to get the activity, for example, create digital purchase order activity. What is the table that we have to use to identify that activity? And what are the attributes do we need to use to construct the event log, including the main attributes, including the case ID and also the timestamp and also activity, right, which is already included here. And additionally, we want to include the employee number associated with that activity. So for the first example, let me walk you through this whole table. Okay. So the first activity, create a digital purchase order. Why do we need an order table to identify that? Because if you go to the order table, the second attribute is called order date. So the order date, this attribute actually describes the creation date of that order. So this is basically your timestamp. Okay. So if I were to put some annotation here, so this one is equivalent to the timestamp that you have to include on your event log. Okay. And then what is the transaction ID? So if you go to the order table, right? So the transaction ID is here. So in this database, we are going to use this field called transaction ID throughout as the case ID. So here, that is basically saying that you are going to use the transaction ID for each and every cell here, because this is a transaction ID that we use to track those individual orders. Okay, so this is equivalent to the case ID in the event log. And then the third attribute is just the activity itself, right? So here we already have that. So we already have the three major elements, 1, 2, 3, right? The case ID, timestamp, and activity. And but additionally, I said that we also want to have the employee number associated to that activity, right? So here we are including this attribute EMP creator number. So if you go to the database, this one is, so maybe we look at the description here. For order table, so if we go to here, this EMP creator number, this is the employee number of the employee who created the customer order, right? So basically this is identifying who performed or who is associated to that activity. So let me just put the annotation here. So this is the who, okay? So this is the additional attribute that I want you to identify. Okay, so here we still have this actors involved that I want you to identify. So this is basically from the case description, right? For example, when we look at how the orders are created, we know that it depends on whether the customer placed the order via phone or online. If it's via phone, then the sales clerk will deal with the order, right? But if it's an online order, then it's a computer system. So here the actors involved is computer system or clerks. So then that completes the first role. Let me give you a preview of what we're gonna do next class. So assuming that you already completed the whole table, okay? And now the next step is to use this table as a guide for us to create an event log. So now, for example, if I know the information of, okay, this is an activity we need, and this is a table we need to query, and these are the attributes, then I can create a query that generates this result. So the result will have transaction ID as the case ID, activity, which is just to create that digital purchase order, timestamp, which is that order date, and the employee. So if you want to look at how the query looks like, it's very simple. It's a very basic select from query. So we select the transaction ID, right? And here I create an additional column called activity and just use the value of create digital purchase order in this column. And then order date as the timestamp, employee number as employee. Just directly select those from this order table, and then I get this. And so on and so forth, for example, and then at the end, after we generate this table for each and every activity, we're going to stitch them together, okay? And then that's our event log. So so let me go through the second example with you too, because this is a very interesting case. So for the second activity, credit approved. So here we know from the case description that only the managers can approve or deny any sales, right? So here, actors involved is sales manager. Now, tables to query, again, it's the order table. Why? Right? If you go to the order table, then there are attributes, especially this field called credit approve YN. So this is a Boolean variable or true or false variable that shows whether or not this order is approved. Okay, so if there is a check mark, then it means that the order is approved or credit is approved. And then we have the timestamp here, okay, and also the employee number associated to that approval. So that is to say, if we were to construct that event log, right? So we have the transaction ID, that's our case ID, credit time, this is our timestamp, and we already have our activity. So employee number, this is the who, right? So now we have this additional credit approval. This is something that we have to use as a filter, because if we go here, we have when we select the sales orders that are approved, we have to filter those based on this attribute being true or being checked. And so that's why here we also include this additional attribute here as a filter. So let me put this. Okay, so this is acting as a filter, but we do not include that in our final result, right? So in our final result, we only need case ID, timestamp, activity, and who is involved. But here, this credit approval, yes or no, is acting as a filter. So let me show you how does this look like if we were to construct this into a query. So in a query, right, we do similar things like just select transaction ID, credit approval as activity, so on and so forth. But then we use this credit approval as a filter, and we include that as a where statement, right? So now if we run this, we only filter out the transactions that are approved. Okay, so this is how we're gonna use the table. So now I want you to follow the same logic. And by the way, I will give you some answers for free. So here, the third activity is called credit denied, okay? So using the same logic, because the credit is either approved or denied, right? That means if for the approved, we are restricting the credit approval to be yes, then for the denied, then it's going to be no, right? So then that is to say I can copy paste the same information from here to here, right? So here I give you some answers for free. So now, since we still have 10 minutes and I'm a little bit fast in this process, so I want you to start working on this just in case if you have any problem. And this assignment is due this Wednesday at noon. Okay, so if you go to assignment number 4, you will see that I included the instruction here, and the table that you have to complete is just it's the same table, right? So you have to submit this Word document via Canvas. And on Wednesday, we're going to use this table as a guide for us to construct the event log. So now I want you to work on this before you leave to make sure that you don't have other questions. So for the attributes, right, I suggest that you look at the data dictionary because this is a description of the attributes included in each table and the meaning. And because if you look at the description, although you understand the process, but you don't know what is the attribute that's actually included in the table. Okay, but if you look at the table, I think you do a combination of the table and also the description to identify the needed attributes.